good? Okay. Hi guys, can you hear me correctly? So it appears that sometimes it's easier to make beer than to live broadcast, but all technical issues are gone now, hopefully. So after all this theory on how to make yeast and all the theory behind fermentation, let's go into the practical stuff. So in Fermentis, we have a characterization program that is divided into subsections, let's say. And this is one of them I'm going to talk about, is how to characterize a yeast with different fermentation conditions. So first of all, kind of reminder, but Gino's already talked about that. We have two species that we work with normally in breweries, which are Saccharomyces pastorianus, which is all in blue, and Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the ale yeast. Okay, they have different pitch rates, range of pitch rates. And it's essentially linked to the working temperature of these yeast. So, for example, we're going to pitch from 50 grams to 80 grams per hectoliter for ale yeast, and from 80 grams to 120 grams for the lager yeast. Another story I always like to say is ale yeast are top fermentation yeast. And where does that come from? Is because our ancestors that also made beer, they had no clue about the yeast. What they had figured out, though, is that if you take the best fermenter, the one that tastes the best, and you recover the yeast from the top and inoculate the next fermenter, you get similar or very nice beer also. And so by doing that, they selected a phenotype, they selected flotation yeast, yeast that would raise at the top of the fermenter at the end of fermentation. So top fermentation. And then industrial revolution came in, and there was a different need. We had cylindrical tanks, and we had the need to collect the yeast at the bottom of the tank. And so back then they selected another phenotype, that is the sedimentation of the yeast at the end of fermentation. And so bottom fermentation. This is most likely where this naming is coming from. So this is a yeast, a budding yeast. And we'll have a look at what's going on inside, because I'm going to use some words like esters and higher alcohol, and I want to make sure we speak the same language. Okay, so quite easy. Don't bother with the name. It all makes sense during the presentation. So what happens is the yeast is going to import the sugar inside of the cell and make pyruvat. So pyruvat is in like a corner. It's a bit like you're on the road and you're a crossroad. Okay, it's a crossroad between different kind of chemical reaction. And out of that, yeast is going to make acetaldehyde, which is the last step before ethanol, and then ethanol. And of course, acetaldehyde can go out of the yeast, which makes this green apple, green flavor in the beer that has not been through maturation yet. And then the yeast can re-import that and make alcohol to it, remove this flavor. Also, yeast is able to make acetyl-CoA. We'll see acetyl-CoA a bit shorter, but it will make the yeast make what we call ethyl acetate. So it's an ester that is nail polish-like, solvent-like flavor, and it's combining one molecule of ethanol and the acetyl-CoA, which makes this most simple ester in the yeast. Yeast can also import amino acid back there, and it will recover the amino function out of this. And the rest is going to go through a series of reactions that will make fusel alcohol or higher alcohol. Okay, so all this flavor coming from the alcohol that is not ethanol comes from amino acid, or most of it. And out of that, the yeast can combine acetyl-CoA and higher alcohol and make what the so-called acetate esters, okay, banana flavor that Gino talked about this morning. This is all coming from sugar and also amino acid. What do I have? Also this, but it's very minor, but yeast can also make fatty acids. Okay, it tries to make reserve material or functional material out of fatty acids, and during the process, this molecule can also combine with ethanol and create the ethyl esters. So we have two kinds of esters, ethyl esters and acetate esters. And ethyl esters are minor compounds, but have more complex flavor, more fruity, complex fruity effect in the yeast. So we have here the diacetyl. I'll just skip that because we don't need to talk about this in this presentation. And also some yeast are POF positive. This is also coming from the yeast and a specific precursor, but I'm going to talk about that this afternoon. So, how to talk about yeast and the flavor profile that you get? Well, we defined what we call the baseline. And the baseline is very simple. You take one wort, 15 plate, you divide it into several fermenters, and in each fermenter, you're going to put one yeast. The next fermenter, a different yeast. So you'll get many different beers, and the only changing parameter is the yeast strain, okay? This is the process, and out of that, we recover this beautiful graph, where we have a spicy axis, a fruity axis, and a neutral axis. Spice is all linked to the phenols. Fruitiness is linked, of course, to the higher alcohol and esters. And the more outside you are from the center, the more fruitiness you will get. Just be careful, between those two, for example, they have the same amount of fruitiness, but let's say the quality of the fruitiness can be very different. Because B256 is all about the banana flavor, and S33 is more fruity complex. Okay, so I think they all have the tips and tricks in the bags. You have one version of this one, now it's a newer version, and then we keep updating it. But in a glance, you can see what kind of profile you will get for your beer. And, well, we wanted to go a bit further than this. We want to change the conditions and see what happens. So we have here the baseline extension fermentation parameters. So let's have an example. Okay, here it's with K97, but we're going to have similar work for other yeast. So basically, we're going to work on three parameters: pitch rate, temperature, and gravity. And so we're going to change the different gravities. So basically, we make a 20 plateau wort, and then we can dilute it to 16 and 12. We make difference in the temperature. So we go from 12 to 24 degrees Celsius, and also we will change the pitch rate. Out of that, I think it's more than 36 possibilities. We're going to select normally 17, which is called design of experiment. So we go a little bit in each direction, and then we'll use the results. So we'll assess the fermentation performances, how it changed the speed and efficiency of fermentation. The volatile compounds, so the beer was analyzed, and we could measure specific esters and higher alcohol. And also, it went through sensory analysis, so basically it's human tasting beer and assessing the results. And we did that for many of our yeast strains. I'm going to present you one today, is 3470. So 3470 is all about lager. It's a bottom fermentation yeast, it's Saccharomyces pastorianus, and you can make many types of different lagers. Let's say that the most important feature about lager is to bring the raw material forward and to, let's say, have a discrete yeast, a more neutral yeast that will just bring back those raw material. So this is here, not a lot of flavor coming from the yeast, but supporting the raw material. So the question was, how we know that 3470 is a neutral yeast. Okay. How neutral is it? This is the question, okay? How can we squeeze something out of this yeast, or is it impossible? So here we have the same, but we went to 200 grams per hectoliter in terms of pitching rate. So it's slightly different between ale and lagers for the design of experiment, but the frame is exactly the same. So here is what we tested. We have three conditions at 12 degrees Celsius. Okay, so if we look here, we are 12 Plato, and we are 25 gram per hectoliter. This is the dash bar like this. Here we had 50 gram per hectoliter, and the dash are horizontal, and here we are plain with 100 gram per hectoliter. Okay, just so you understand, and we'll use this while presenting the results. We have those at 16 degrees Celsius, and you can see here we have a 200 gram per hectoliter here, and also some conditions are at 20 degrees Celsius. Okay, now we all know what we're going to do. Let's have some fun and analyze the results. This is the fermentation dynamic. You can see the three extracts, and you can see many lines and not many things. Well, one thing we can extract out of this is that everything that is in blue, which is very cold, goes slower. Well, it's kind of expected, but we had proved this for this yeast and all the other yeast. When you increase the fermentation temperature, you go faster, way faster. Because here we have fermentation that's finished after 4 or 5 days, and then it can take up to 19 days at cold temperature. So let's have a look at 12 Plato. And we can see really that the fermentation goes faster when you increase the temperature. And also here we can see a big difference. So this is 50 gram per hectoliter, and you see that at 20 degrees you go way faster. Pretty much we have the same conclusion for here at 16 Plato, only with the higher extract you exacerbate the differences. Okay, so you have one stress that is the temperature, and also you have another stress that is the extract, and combined they will make even longer fermentations. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And here, this is where we got the longest fermentation, and again, the cold condition were really fermenting way slower. And also we could see between the pitch rate, you can see here we have 3 different pitch rates. 200, 100, and this is 25. And you can see that when you have harsher conditions, the pitch rate comes really into play into the fermentation dynamic, where when you don't pitch enough, you go too slow, and when you pitch higher, you go faster. So this is a bit technical. Let's see that it's, we are going to look at different parameters and how they affect each other. And what was really clear is that here we have a very, very big negative correlation between the duration of the fermentation and the temperature, which is exactly what I meant, is when you increase temperature, like this, you shorten fermentation time. The only difference is that before I show you graph, I can show you any graph and say this is happening. This is the result of a statistical study. Okay, we took all the data and used statistical tool that I'm not going to talk about to actually prove this. One also very obvious one is that if you increase the density, you will increase the ethanol content of the final beer. Oh, well, we all knew that. Also the density, it increases the fermentation duration. That was also expected. So, well, the higher the density, the longer the fermentation time, the higher the fermentation temperature, the shorter the fermentation time. I think I said that correctly. Okay, let's have some fun. Do you know, guys, what is the threshold of a compound? Yes, one person knows. Good. Yes. So, you take a group of people like you, and we give you beer. The first beer has 0 of this compound. The second beer is a bit more, a bit more, a bit more, a bit more. And your only task is to say, I detect, I don't detect. And we will define the threshold when 50% of you guys detects the compounds and 50% don't. So when we are at the threshold, we are at average perception by a certain population, okay, in a specific condition. we'll use flavor unit. So it's very easy. When we are threshold, the concentration and the perception threshold gives you an outcome of 1. When we are at 2, we have 2 times more concentration than the concentration of the threshold, 3, etc., etc. Okay? So this is very handy because if I show you concentration of compounds, well, you don't know anything. But if I show flavor unit, you know immediately I'm below or above the threshold. Okay? So this is all the fusel alcohol. So like I said, here, well, what the heck do you know, huh? But here we have number 1 here. The threshold is right on this line. And what do we see? Well, we have only 1 compound that sometimes is above detection threshold. This is isoamyl alcohol, which is banana flavor for higher alcohol. And all the rest is just below the threshold. So we can expect to have few aromatic compounds coming from the yeast in terms of fusel alcohol. Okay, that's what I meant. Here we have the detection threshold. We can measure that there is a correlation in concentration of these compounds and density. Okay? So yes, there is an evolution. The higher the density, the more of the compound you have, but no or little chance to actually be able to detect it. And this is for the esters. And, well, long story short, here is the detection threshold, and few of these compounds is above this threshold, and I think it's always the isoamyl acetate. Yes, always the isoamyl acetate. So, overall, what we see is that we have a lot of different conditions here, but if you are 20 degrees Celsius or 12, if you are 12 Plato or 20 Plato, the differences is not that huge, or even very, very, very small, let's say. Here is all of what is above the threshold, which is not a lot. Okay? And then you will say, oh, Gilles, it's very interesting, but how this beer tastes? To do so, we have put together a sensory panel. So it's basically using the human as a measurement device. Okay? So we have a group of people, they gather in a room that is dedicated for tasting, and they're going to be trained first. They need to give, to accept together that this word is going to be for this compound. Okay? Because sometimes it can be very confusing. People are talking about the same compound with different words. They need to be in line with what word to use. Then they will have a tasting session, and they will be given a sheet of paper or a tablet where they will slide around the intensity of what they detect. And then after that, all of this is analyzed also statistically, and we can say we have a difference or we don't have a difference based on statistical relevance. Okay? And basically, this is what we got. A lot of lines. We recognize the colors. Let's have a look. We have fruity, floral, phenolic, etc. And this little star here is when we have a statistical difference. And this little sign is when we have a tendency. Okay, it's not statistically strong enough to say it's different, but there is a tendency there. Okay, what do we have? Alcohol, the alcohol perception. We have off note, and we have sweetness. So overall, one of the beer was really with an off note. We'll talk about that later. And people generally can perceive that there was more alcohol in some samples than other samples. And they could detect a bit difference of volume, of sweetness of the beer. And the rest? Nothing. And the warmth also, yeah. So overall, the panel was able to detect the level of alcohol in those beers and the presence of off-note in one specific sample. For the off-flavor, it was mainly diacetyl. Okay, it was mainly diacetyl, and diacetyl was linked to samples with low fermentation temperature. So we don't have time to go really deep into that, but that's why we make diacetyl rest. And the higher the temperature, the shorter the diacetyl rest is. And indeed, there was a bit more diacetyl and also DMS. So again, it's a bit complicated to go into details, but it has been proven in many studies that when you decrease fermentation temperature, the amount of DMS you get is a bit higher. Okay, so pretty much that was it. And just a little story about that. Our colleague Gabriela is heading this sensory team, and it was her first assignment, first ever. And then she looked at the results. She was very disappointed. She's like, "Oh, the panel is no good. Huh? They did not detect any difference." So she went over the result again. They tasted again, and then overall, after she tasted the beers, and she had to conclude that she herself, a sensory expert, could not detect the difference between the beers. And so at first we were like, oh, it's a bit weird. Are we going to show this to brewers or not? But then we understood the power of this. Normally lagers, if you go in lager countries like Czech Republic, like Germany, like Poland, they all ferment at very, very, very cold temperature. Okay? Why do they do that? Most probably because of historical background. But we actually were the first to show that it's possible with 3470 to make a clean lager in a third of the time just by increasing the temperature, and you get exactly the same profile, and you don't need to go to 8, 9, or 10 degrees Celsius. Okay? So after that we realized how powerful is this, is that you can make a lager at 20 degrees Celsius. So the conclusion for the sensory analysis, the higher the density, the higher volatile impact. So we proved that it was a bit more volatile, a bit more high alcohol, a bit more esters, but with no impact on the flavor of the beer. And the lower the fermentation temperature, the higher the risk of off-note like DMS or diacetyl. So it's a win-win situation. Just to show you, because this is, we recommend between 80 gram and 120 gram per hectoliter on standard conditions. So let's be right at the middle, 100. We have a perfect correlation between temperature and duration. Okay, we have here an index of minus 0.996, which is basically 100%. So 100% of the difference between the fermentation duration can be explained by the temperature, which is really powerful. And so the conclusion is that soft lager 3470 is very neutral, and it allows you to make really faster fermentation compared to lower temperature and keeping a really clean lager profile. It's very robust yeast. You had no problem going up to 20 Plato. It could even go higher. And it's an ideal strain for many types of lagers, especially the ones that you want to be very, very neutral, especially no fruity esters on the final lager. Do I still have time, Jim?
Yep.
I still have time. Good. Because we are not finished yet, but I'm going to show you two more yeast that we characterized. And you will see that the layout is a bit different because we evolve and try to make better looking presentations. So Safil K97, K97 is going to be talked about this afternoon also. And at the beginning it was a yeast for Kolsch, German Kolsch beers. We can also make fake Belgian wit, fake because it's not phenolic, and as a Belgian wheat beer should be phenolic. What we also found out is that it's really great yeast with hop. It works brilliantly with hop, and I think that Gino is going to explain that this afternoon. So we made exactly the same. The design of the experiment is exactly the same as I showed you before. And basically, this is the result that we can expect. So we have here ethyl acetate, isoamyl acetate, that are the ones that are above the threshold, okay? And what did we see? We have a clear correlation between the extract. So the more extract you have, the more dense the wort is, the more esters you will get out of this yeast. And also, it was the pitch rate did not affect that much the yeast, except if you go too high in pitching rates. So here you have a drop from low pitch rate to high pitch rate in esters. Here, same, we have a drop every time. So we prove that if you put too much yeast, well, you will get a lower fruity beer. And also this is the correlation. So pretty much for the density, if you increase the density, you should increase the floral, fruity perception, the body perception, the alcohol perception. And if you decrease the extract, you promote, let's say, sulfury perception. And here for the pitch rate, if we increase the pitch rate, we decrease fruitiness, and at the same time we increase sulfury. So K97 is a yeast that can, in some conditions, produce sulfur compounds. And the two conditions are low extract, high pitch rate. So conclusion is that if you are working around 12 Plato, please don't put more than 50 grams per hectoliter in fermentation, and you will be good to go. Because if you put 80 or even more, chances are you're going to produce a bit of sulfur compound that's going to ruin your beer. And if you're at higher extract, then depending on the condition, you may increase the pitch rate or not. And also, it should increase the fruity perception by decreasing the pitch rate, especially at low gravities. So this is the conclusion. Also, don't use it at too low temperature because the fermentation will just stop. So for me, K97 is 20 degrees Celsius or higher, never lower. Fermentation speed is increased by pitch rate. Pitching rate also speed up the fermentation, and then higher temperature may decrease some volatiles. Okay. SAF Ale S33. SAF Ale S33. Do I have something on? No. It's a yeast that does not ferment maltotriose, so it will give you very, very wrong and high volume beers, but also very interesting in terms of aromatics. And what we see here is that we have really a clear, but it couldn't be more clear than this. Huh? The more you have extract, the more fruitiness you will get out of your beer, especially with isoamyl acetate and ethyl acetate. And also very interesting yeast, very interesting, because here we have an ethyl esters, ethyl hexanoate. And this is very rare for Cerevisier to produce such an ester. So you will have the complex fruitiness that I was talking to you about. And the descriptor for this is red apple. Okay, so it's very, very nice to know. And in some cases, we had a drop with pitch rate, but it's not that relevant. So if you increase the temperature, you will increase banana flavor and complex flavor. And if you decrease the temperature, we have here the DMS again, we have here the diacetyl again. So it's always going to be the same story. If you ferment at too low temperature, the chance to have high amount of diacetyl is way higher. And then for the density, we had a strong correlation with density towards sweetness. Of course, it does not ferment maltotriose. So if you go higher in extract, you will get higher amount of maltotriose, and so more sweetness in the beer. Honey-like, banana, complexity, and intensity, sorry, and also complex fruitiness. So here, higher temperatures tend to promote fruitiness. Lower temperature tend to make your beer not that good. So again, with that yeast, it's better to be at 20 degrees Celsius or higher. And we have a really strong correlation with the extract, the density. And so, for example, if you want to make a really full-bodied beer very complex and high in aromatic, you go higher in extract, and you get that very, very easily. And how to use is between 20 and 24 degrees Celsius for S33. 16 degrees Celsius increase the possibility of having a long fermentation. That's what we saw in the result I can show you. And 12 degrees, you just should forget it, okay? So in some cases, 16 to 18 degrees Celsius might be an option, but I'm much more comfortable to go at a higher temperature, you go faster, and then you have less problem. Less diacetyl and TMS, etc. Higher extract promotes a lot of fruitiness, complexity, and sweetness of the beer, and the mineral pitch rate is really 50 grams per hectoliter. If you go lower, you might go into problems. So that's it for me this morning. Do you have any questions?
3470 you had mentioned performs well at higher temperature with minimal differences. What is the impact of pressure fermentation as well as higher temperature?
Yeah, the pressure. So I'm going to talk purely theory. We don't have the experiment to back this up, okay? But when you put counter pressure, especially early in fermentation, what happens is that you dissolve CO2 in the beer, and this is toxic for the yeast. So it will most likely avoid yeast to reach the high biomass, so you will produce less biomass, and the consequence of this is a longer fermentation. On paper, based on studies, you should also get a little bit less esters by doing that. But what I always say to brewers is, let's say you are using a fruity lager yeast, and you don't want fruity lager. You have two options. Either you put counter pressure, or you just switch to 3470, and then you don't need to put counter pressure to get a really neutral beer. So for me, counter pressure, it's only for natural carbonation and should only be applied late in fermentation, and then you don't have any problems. Okay, so if you do have a question during lunchtime or after, don't hesitate to come up to us. That's what we are here for. And I believe it's
Lunchtime.
lunchtime, yes.
So you'd have all been.
Let them applaud you,
You'd have all been given the flavour packs. Please don't eat them, or try to sell them. But we will get around to using them after lunch.
So, time-wise, is it okay?
Perfect. Yeah.
Only 7 people are watching, right?
How many people?
7.
7 people.
Like, that's better, no?
That's good. I have 7 extra.